What's that?
What my phone went off. I said I went to Daniel and it went to chapter 1 and it started reading out loud.
Oh.
I make it read to me because I'm lazy.
Well.
You hit the wrong arrow. I do that all the time.
I have it under control now.
If you wanted to give Daniel chapter 2 some kind of overview, I would give it this. And there's all these commentaries. Daniel is one of the most commented on books in the entire Bible. It is probably one of the more go-to books in Old Testament prophecy. And so there's all that stuff out there, and I am relying on multiple commentaries to pull this together. But then it seems like with this, and as it gets started, it's kind of, for me, like what Zechariah was. There's some things that are popping out that I feel like, oh, that's what we're supposed to focus on, right? I think God is showing some things that He wants us to focus on. So my summations here might be a little bit different than what you see in the commentaries. But if you get the commentaries and your Bible's got a commentary, you've got that anyway, right? So I don't want to just regurgitate something that is already there, but know that I am pulling heavily on, the teachings of these learned men who are deep into this. But there was two things that stepped out for me, and this is one of them. It says when God sets up things through His people, right? Sometimes we don't always know what He's doing or why He's doing it, but He has a plan always. And the other thing is that He is still using people who don't even acknowledge Him. And so whether or not someone is on the Lord's side, so to speak, are you on the Lord's side, the old way to say it, doesn't always roadblock God using them. And I think this is what you see in Daniel chapter 2 with the Babylonians, with Nebuchadnezzar, with all of these pagan people. That was a pagan culture. And yet, God began the rise of the Gentile nations with that group for a purpose, for a reason. And He allowed them to overthrow Judah. So there was a reason God used them, right? And we'll see what this is. So when you kind of take that, it's helped me to think about that. As you get into it, then you see why all these little pieces make sense, right? So tonight we're just going to look at verses 1 through 23, which is the dream. And then next week we'll look at the interpretation, because when you get into the interpretation, it is kind of the basis of a lot of end time studies, because you've got the breakout of the four kingdoms, the rise of the Gentile nations, which leads to the second coming of Jesus Christ. And so there's a whole framework of things there that was in Nebuchadnezzar's dream. So with that, we'll get into that more deeply next week. But tonight I wanted to look at this dream specifically. And we're going to start with Daniel chapter 2, verse 1. It says this: Now, in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was troubled, and his sleep left him. Then he gave orders to call in the magicians and the conjurers, the sorcerers and the Chaldeans, to tell the king his dreams. So they came in and stood before the king. And the king said to them, I had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to understand the dream. Then the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic. O king, live forever. Tell the dream to your servants, and we will declare the interpretation. The king replied to the Chaldeans, The command from me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you will be torn limb from limb, and your houses will be made a rubbish heap. Verse 6. If you declare the dream and its interpretation, you will receive from me gifts and a reward and great honor. Therefore, declare to me the dream and its interpretation. In other words, tell me, if you're all that, you all are supposed to be able to tell the future. You all are supposed to be able to know what's coming. That's what you say you are. Tell me what I dreamed, right? All right, so that's what that is. So verse 7, they answered a second time and said, Let the king tell the dream to his servants, and we will declare the interpretation. And the king replied, I know for certain that you are bargaining for time, inasmuch as you have seen that the command from me is firm. In other words, I've made up my mind. I'm telling you what I want. So quit delaying here, right? Verse 9, that if you do not make the dream known to me, there is only one decree for you. For you have agreed together to speak lying and corrupt words before me until the situation is changed. Therefore tell me the dream, that I may know that you can declare to me its interpretation. The Chaldeans answered the king and said, There's not a man on earth who would declare the matter for the king, inasmuch as no great king or ruler has ever asked anything like this of any magician, conjurer, or Chaldean. Moreover, the thing which the king demands is difficult, and there is no one else who could declare it to the king except God's, whose dwelling place is not with mortal flesh. Well, truer words are never spoken, right? Verse 12. Because of this, the king became indignant and very furious, and gave orders to destroy all of the wise men of Babylon. So the decree went forth that the wise men should be slain, and they looked for Daniel and his friends to kill them. Then Daniel replied with discretion and discernment. Underline that in your Bible. I just love how that says. Daniel replied with discretion and discernment to Arioch, the captain of the king's bodyguard, who had gone forth to slay the wise men of Babylon. He said to Arioch, the king's commander, For what reason is the decree from the king so urgent? Then Arioch informed Daniel about the matter. So Daniel went in and requested of the king that he would give him time, in order that he might declare the interpretation to the king. Then Daniel went to his house and informed his friends Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah about the matter, so they might request compassion from God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that Daniel and his friends would not be destroyed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Verse 19. Then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel said, Let the name of God be blessed forever and ever, for wisdom and power belong to him. It is he who changes the times and the epochs, or the seasons. He removes kings and establishes kings. He gives wisdom to wise men and knowledge to men of understanding. It is he who reveals, I've talked a lot today. It is he who reveals the profound and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells in him. To you, O God, my fathers, I give thanks and praise, for you have given me wisdom and power. Even now you have made known to me what we requested of you, for you have made known to us the king's matter. Another thing, Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. Daniel had a vision. All right? So there's a couple of things going on here, right? It's important to look at everything that is being told in the story to really understand what's going on. God is at work here, and he's using 4 young boys. These guys couldn't have been more than 20 at that point, right? Depending on how old they were when they got in there. So this happened very quickly right after that 3-year time period was up. And so with that, Daniel was able to jump in and make prayer the first thing he did, right? He didn't panic or anything like that. So what I want to do, any questions on any of that, and then we're going to start in on this kind of piece by piece. Yes?
Make a couple of comments.
Yeah.
Not jumping ahead.
No, go ahead.
2 things that came to my mind. God knows exactly what we're thinking. He knew what the dream was.
Yes.
And he deals with the impossible.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's right. And Daniel had no doubt about that, really. Right. In the overview of the story, Daniel didn't think, oh, we're stunk, you know. He thought there was hope through God. Anybody else? Any of that? So, all right, let's jump into this, because there's a conflict here, and it would look like maybe there's a timeline that is off here, right? So it says, verse 1, in the 2nd year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was troubled, and his sleep left him. So right off the bat, you go, well, I thought Nebuchadnezzar in 606, 605, 606, in that time period, came in and besieged Judah and Jerusalem. But this is saying it's the 2nd year of his reign. Didn't he already reign? And now all of a sudden you've got Daniel tied into this, and it's only the 2nd year of his reign. What is up with that? So that is where a lot of liberal critics come in, and they start to say, oh, see, this was not right. The timeline's not right. Daniel is not correct. But Daniel is correct, and here's how we know this. So Daniel and his friends had been in that 3-year training period, And so they are already in the service of the king. We saw that at the tail end of chapter 1, right? So with that, this says then in the second year of his reign. Well, the second year of his reign was most likely 604 BC, because Nebuchadnezzar's father was king, and he died in 604. So if in 606, 605, 604, you go backwards in time, right? In that period of time, over those 3 years that Daniel and his friends were in that training period, and then they were approved and they were put in the king's cabinet. And it would appear to me in that timeline that right after that happened, this dream happened, which then would make sense. Why? Because you've got the end of the Jewish kingdom and the rise of the Gentile kingdoms in that period, right? And so with the rise of the Gentile kingdoms, that's what this dream was all about. We'll see this next week. But he's letting Nebuchadnezzar know, this is what's happening, and it's starting with you. So in that timing, and with that, it would look to me like that after Nebuchadnezzar's father passed away, then he was installed, and then with that, this is the second year of his reign. So if over that period of time, and if that doesn't make sense, I can put it on paper. But people talking about numbers always blows me away anyway. So me talking about numbers is probably not very good either. But that being said, that was kind of what it looks to me like the timing is. It happened right at the end of that 3-year period. They had just been installed in his cabinet, and now that is the second year of his reign, and in that time period. And so now that he has risen to power, then God is letting him know what's going to happen.
And that makes sense. Since they graduated, they were on the same level as the astrologers and these other people that he listened to, so they were sentenced to death also. Correct.
And think about this. So within the first 3 years of them being there, their lives were endangered from the get-go. They put themselves in danger by saying, we're not going to eat the king's food, and with that, they knew that could end very badly for them. And then all of a sudden, now you've got this, and they weren't even part of that. Daniel goes, what's going on? Well, here's what's going on. So it's fascinating that these guys were in some struggle and turmoil from the get-go, and yet God is in the mix with them. Thoughts on any of that? All right, so the king gave orders. I love this story. This it smacks a little bit with me like Elijah and the prophets of Baal, where he's kind of taunting them a little bit. But it's those prophets of Baal with him proved that they couldn't do what they said they could do, and God used this dream to prove to Nebuchadnezzar that all of the best people he had surrounding him, who were wrapped up, and we're going to see what they were all at, witchcraft, occult, astrology, all of that, were not going to be able to do for him anything at all, right? So this dream kind of proves a lot of things. It proves ultimately who God is and that he is able, and yet it proves that his people are not that. So in that it says, he said, I had a dream, verse 3, and my spirit is anxious to understand the dream. The Chaldeans said, well, king, live forever, tell us your dream, and we'll declare the interpretation. And Nebuchadnezzar, sometimes that is like, people say, oh, Nebuchadnezzar forgot the dream. He didn't forget the dream. He's testing these guys. He's saying, you tell me what I dream. If you're all that, you tell me what I dream. And they're on the spot, because they could tell him anything. They could make up whatever, great interpretation. He didn't want to hear that. He didn't want to hear them tell a bunch of stuff that wasn't true. He really wanted to know what this meant. So I don't think it was that he forgot. And Dr. McGee and Dr. Unger both said, yeah, he didn't forget. He hadn't forgotten at all what this was. He was saying to them, you tell me what this is. And his judgment was in the same breath as like, if you don't tell me, you guys are out, because you can either do this or you can't, kind of thing. Thoughts on any of that? Yes, sir.
Just opens the door for God's man to step through.
Absolutely.
Make
Absolutely.
a way where there is no.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. Couple of things I thought were verse 12, the king became indignant and very furious. It's like, he must have been a super emotional guy, you know. I can't imagine what his tweets were like. I'll just put it that way. If he had mean tweets. Sorry.
And what he said was law.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was no Congress to shoot it down.
No.
He was it.
He was it. What he said became the law, or whatever that he wanted to have happen, you know. And we get a little insight into his character here too, and that we'll see again in the storyline with Daniel. He was very emotional, very hot-headed, you know, very, very proud of himself, we think, you know, as you see what happens to him when he loses his mind for 7 years. You know, so in that, so just get this picture. So he is hot that these guys can't do it. He is given the command. If you can't do it, he's given them a death sentence. And yet, God gives Daniel some grace to go in there and favor. Because Daniel's able to go in, because why? Because he keeps his head. He is cool. He didn't lose it. He goes in and, you know. And with that, I think that just tells us, when God is in the mix, we can be at peace, even in the midst of a storm.
Right.
But what great faith Daniel must have had. Because we'll just go ask God. When God is tried, and that's an amazing amount of faith.
Yeah. And who he understood God to be, so the faith that he had was because he understood God could do anything. Right? Yeah.
Obviously, these people didn't fool around. If you go back to chapter 1, the prince of the eunuchs, he's telling, Daniel comes to him and says, you know, we want this on our menu. And he's saying, you don't understand. He said, if I lay this out in front of the king and you don't look as good as you should, he's going to take my head off.
Yeah.
So, Nebuchadnezzar, when we get to chapter 2, he's not fooling around. I mean, he's going to take these guys out, and that's it.
Yep. He didn't fool around at all, you know, based on the storyline that we see. Anybody else? Yeah.
It's kind of a good example of peace that passes all understanding, because Daniel wasn't, you know, can you imagine? If you don't tell me what the dream is, you're going to die.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure I could even get on my knees and pray.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
But Daniel was calm, collected, and he had faith in the Lord. It's kind of like I'm going ahead now.
No, it's all right.
The Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego,
Yeah.
you know, well, he put us in the fire furnace, we die, so be it.
Yeah.
We have faith in the Lord no matter what.
Yep.
And that's the attitude of a Christian.
Absolutely. Yeah, Lisa.
So back at the end of chapter 1, when after the eating, and then he's presented to Nebuchadnezzar, I'm New International. King talked with them and found none equal to Daniel and the others. So he entered the service. In every matter of wisdom, understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians. So he already knew that these guys were above the bar.
Yeah.
And yet, those weren't the ones that he called to him for the dream.
Yeah.
I think that's interesting.
Yeah.
You know, because he right here it says, you know, they were far and away more on target, and yet when he had these dreams, he didn't ask Daniel
First.
Yeah, I would have thought that he would.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a great point.
Was
Wonder
there
why
a
he
3-year
didn't.
period between that point and where we're at now in chapter 2?
It doesn't say. I mean, it's just the end of.
Because
That's
they were,
up to 21,
right,
verse
they were
21.
educated for 3 years, so I'm thinking time period here. I had
Okay, and Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus. So he remained with Nebuchadnezzar. It doesn't say where they were. So I don't think.
Right. Yeah, and in the timeline there, it would look to me.
At the end of the time.
Yeah, at the end of that, so at the end of chapter 1 and the beginning of chapter 2, it seems like, to me, knowing when he came fully into power after his father died, he took the throne, would have been right at the turn point at the end of that 3-year period. So I mean, they just had walked out of that training period and walked into that. So perhaps the reason he didn't call them first, because they were really new on the job, right? He called the old guard in first, which would make sense.
They've been at school.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
The first line, the ones with more experience.
Right.
He probably would have gone to, and he's familiar with them.
Yeah.
I mean, there is his trusted advisors and soothsayers, etc.
Yep.
These are kids.
Yeah, exactly. And they're foreign kids.
Yeah.
You know?
Sure. But it's a wonder that they were included in the ones that were killed, since they were.
You're going to clean house and start all over, I guess.
Yes.
So, anybody else on that? So let's look at here a little bit. So what's happening? Why did this dream come about? Well, this dream came about, as we will see, but I got to give you a little foreshadowing here on this, is that Babylon became the first of 4 Gentile kingdoms to rule the world, or the known world at that time. The difference between a worldwide kingdom and a superpower is that, for example, the United States and or Russia may have had desire to have world influence, but they were never able to do it because we also were a superpower and we kept each other at bay. Our desire as the United States has never been to have world power and rule over the world. We defeated enemies and then rebuilt them so that they could live their own lives. Japan and Germany and so on. But Babylon defeated Judah, and so they then became the first Gentile nation to defeat Israel, okay, and put them out. And at that point, that was the beginning. 606, 605 was the beginning of the rise of the Gentile nations, which we're in now, right? Now, we'll understand this timeline a little bit better. But the Gentile nations, even though Israel is back, the Gentile nations, this is how you know where we're at in God's timeline towards the end, are here, and Israel's up, and Israel shouldn't have come back, except it did, right? I mean, and how did that happen? So we'll see all that as we move forward. But Babylon then truly was the greatest of the Gentile nations, and that's what we see in this dream. So as they took the Jewish kingdom out because of God's judgment on them, then they rose to power. Now, with that, Satan has used and is going to use, and particularly at the end will use, the Gentile nations for his own purposes. So we see Babylon as this pagan kingdom, and the Gentile nations, every Gentile nation. There have been Christian people in Rome, right? There have been God's people, the remnant we see in Babylon, but all of the Gentile nations have been opposed to God. You know, there weren't Christian Gentile nations. There weren't Gentile nations that were on God's way of thinking, right? They were all kind of basically pagan or demonic. So Satan will use the Gentile kingdoms, and in that he's going to use the Gentile kingdoms to try to rule the world that last 7 years of the tribulation period. So what we get here, and the key point here, is paganism. The Gentile ruling kingdoms, all of them were pagan, right? And we see this in Jonathan Cahn's book, The Return of the Gods, that the Roman Empire, which kind of stopped being, but was never overtaken by another kingdom. They were pagan, but as Christianity rose up and increased, it pushed paganism to the side, right? And we talked about that as we looked at his book. And that's a great read. Return to the Gods is a great read. You want to know what's happening to our country and our culture and the world, read that book, because this is where Christianity has been marginalized, or if you want to put it this way, in the Laodicean era of the church, where the church is very impotent in its work for the kingdom, then paganism can rise back up, and that's what's happening. So, Gentile kingdoms were pagan and demonic. Dr. Unger said this: paganism was attached in the great importance to the dreams. God used Nebuchadnezzar's dreams to reveal his plan to the Gentile king, but ultimately God used an Israelite, Daniel, to bring the interpretation. And I thought, that struck me in our time, and I'm going to raise the name of Jonathan Cahn again here, because in our time, particularly in the last, I would say 10 years, I don't forget when The Harbinger first came out, but it was probably a good 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Anybody remember something like that? Or maybe longer. And the subsequent books he has had, you have a Messianic Jewish rabbi who is explaining to us Old Testament symbolism and deep things of the Old Testament so we can understand in our time kind of what is happening to us. And so God used Daniel on the inside of that kingdom to express kingdom values and God's values in there. So God planted Daniel in there. God used this Israelite to bring that interpretation. God used his people to show the Gentiles what was coming and what it meant. It's like, wow. And I just thought, it's the same thing with Jonathan Cahn, and there's some other Messianic Jewish people that are out there. Joel C. Rosenberg is another one that strikes me, that they are telling us some things that it explains it in a more deep way. And it's like, wow, which also should tell us we are in biblical times,
Yeah.
So any thoughts on that?
Can you imagine if you were Daniel and you were captured and you went through all this that he's gone through? Would you be saying, okay, Lord, where are you at? But he was right there. He had plans for Daniel.
Yeah.
And a lot of times we're put in position and in places where we're thinking that, but God has a plan for us.
Right.
We just need to stay faithful.
Yeah. Yeah. Boy, it sure seems that way sometimes. Like, God, where are you at?
Yeah.
All right. So that piece of it, I think, is critical to know. The other piece of this chaos in the palace, Dr. McGee also said that it's very unlikely that Nebuchadnezzar forgot that dream, but God used that moment to show Nebuchadnezzar something, right? So he wanted those people who are always telling him what he wanted to hear. He didn't want yes men in this case. Excuse me. And so Dr. McGee said basically he was putting those men to the test to see if they really could tell the future. And if they could tell the future, it wouldn't be hard for them to do. If they couldn't, well, then that's going to tell him what he needed to know too. But there's the magicians, conjurers, sorcerers, and Chaldeans. The magicians, that word, the Hebrew word is chartom, and it's a diviner, magician, and astrologer. So that was that group. The conjurers, that's Ashaph, and they were enchanters, exorcists. They contacted demons and talked to the dead. Ultimately, they were talking to demons, right? So this is the culture, right? This is where that culture was. That's what Daniel and these guys were in. Sorcerers were witchcraft and sorcery. And so they used witchcraft. And then the Chaldeans were the intellectuals in that sense. But they were kind of all of that. They were famous in the occult arts. So anything that you can imagine that would be under that umbrella. So he's got all four of these. So think about that. These were the best and the brightest, and they were giving him all of this instruction. Well, what they're bringing into this, they're bringing in demonic paganism is demonic stuff. They're conjuring up all this. So you've got a culture that is highly demonized and very dark. And you got Daniel and his people in on this. God put them right in the middle of that. This is what I want you to think about, he put his remnant in that.
Yes.
This is what remnants do. This is what remnants have to do. While it would be great for the remnant we can keep having the Sunday school picnic, I think the days of our Sunday school picnics are over in that sense. So the remnant is called specifically to do things nobody else is going to do. And really, the remnant, it's the light that shines from the remnant that has to shine into darkness. And I think that's kind of what the parallels I see out of Daniel. And this is what I think, I'm going, okay, well, that's what I see. So it just makes sense to me that why this book it has relevance to where we are right now. Thoughts on that? You remember where Babylon came from, right? I mean, the term Babel came from the original Tower of Babel. What do you remember about the Tower of Babel? Nimrod, who was kind of sort of like, in a way, a foreshadowing of a worldwide leader. He led that whole deal,
Yeah, a number of men, mighty men of renown.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What about the tower?
Well, why did they call Nimrod a mighty warrior before God?
Well, he had just distinguished himself.
He was against God.
Yeah, he wasn't necessarily God's man, but on the earth at that time, right?
But the tower was to build the tower to heaven to
Correct.
be equal with or better than God.
Correct. And
Which is
also
what Satan was doing.
right, and it was worshiping the creation rather than the creator.
Correct.
Right? For one, out of Babel came occultism, astrology, demonic worship. There's a whole host of things that came out of Babel. That's why in the Bible you never see the word Babylon used in a positive way. God is always opposed to Babel or Babylon. He's always opposed to it. And so when you get to Revelation and you see, the references to Babylon, it's always in a connotation that is evil and wicked and opposed to God, because Babel was evil and wicked and opposed to God. So Babylon, that kingdom, was evil and wicked and opposed to God. And God placed those 4 young men in that culture to be his representatives against all of that. And it's mind-numbing to think about that those guys, what they were living in and around. So even while, you've heard me say it feels a little dark out there, I can't imagine what it would have been like in that culture.
Especially at that age.
Yeah.
I mean, what were they, 20 maybe?
At that point.
Oh, I wasn't very mature at 20.
Right.
I'll tell you right now.
And it didn't overwhelm them. They stood against it.
Yes.
They stood against it. So it's fascinating to think kind of what this was like, and I think that's the picture. So you've got a king who's an egomaniac, if you want to call him that, so this pagan kingdom is now the greatest Gentile nation on the planet, and God still used them, because when you go back to Daniel chapter 1, he says God gave Judah into Nebuchadnezzar's hand. He let that happen, knowing who these people were. He had a plan. Yeah.
We read scripture where it says God places those in high positions, leaders.
Yep.
And you look at some, you think, really?
Yep.
Well, yes. Here he did it here too.
Yep. And we're going to look at that verse here shortly, but
Okay.
keep going. No, keep going. If you
I'm fine.
Yeah, no. So I remember, anyway, let me back up. So you've got that culture. Nebuchadnezzar's looking to all these guys to connect him to something that is not human. Put it that way. Do you remember who were back in the day that Nancy Reagan did that? Do you remember she would contact fortune teller, soothsayer,
Yes.
out in California or something like that? Because she was always, it's like, ooh, it was just kind of weird about that whole deal. But she did that too. And I would suppose there's probably leaders everywhere that, if the truth be known, there was probably a lot of them want to know, what's my legacy, what's my whatever. So, but that being said, God is still at work in all that. Dr. Unger said that God gave the dream in all that it contains, so that no one but his own true servants would be able to connect him to that whole story, right? So he gave the dream to Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar didn't know what it meant. His people didn't know what it meant. God didn't want them to know what he just wanted them to have the dream. But he didn't want them to know what it meant, so that his people, who were his boots on the ground, if you want to put that one, were able to then step in and represent him in that situation. And again, I say, this is what the remnant does. But man, think about what they were up against. And it's one thing to sit in a room and talk about being the remnant. It's another thing to leave the room and go out and be the remnant.
Yes.
But I do think, I bring all that up to tell you, I think this is where we're going. I think this is what the remnant is going to have to do. We're going to have to go out, and it's going to be uncomfortable, and it's going to be oppressive, and we have to see what the faith of others have been in who God really is, and have that same faith to represent him well. Thoughts? Yes.
I was thinking about what Ray said. Could be more about, these are just teenagers and their faith. But if you jump ahead a little bit, Daniel was thrown into the lion's den. God steps it up. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen.
Yeah.
God sends an angel to close the mouths of the lions, and when the other three are thrown into the fiery pit, there was a fourth man there likened to the Son of God.
Yeah.
So he's showing his God's letting him know, I got your back.
Absolutely. Anybody else? There's one other thing here too. Notice in verse 4 that it says, let me read it out of here because I want to get it here. Chapter 2, verse 4. So it says, the Chaldean spoke to the king, and it says, in parentheses, it'll say, Aramaic begins here. All right? So from that point on through chapter 7, everything is written in Aramaic. Okay? So Dr. McGee said the reason for that is that God now is speaking to the Gentiles. That was the known language. So like English is kind of the worldwide language by and large on the planet now. Aramaic was the worldwide language at that time. So God allowed Daniel wrote this down in that because that was of interest to the world. And it's in their language, in their tongue, so that they can read what's going on. So after that, it goes back to Hebrew in the later chapters, because that part is about God and his people, right? So, it's not that we haven't got it interpreted, but in that, why is that in there? That's why that's in there. And Dr. McGee said that's because God is speaking to the world, not just his nation. He says Israel's gone into Babylonian captivity. God's taken the scepter out of the line of David, and he's put it into Gentile hands, the worldwide in that sense. It will stay there until the day he takes it back. And when he does, the nail-pierced hands of Jesus will take the scepter, because it is God's intention for Jesus to reign. So we see here, this is the rise. This is the beginning of end-time prophecy. This is what has happened, because God says, this is how this is all going to end. So all of this, even 2,500 years ago, is this march to the reign of Jesus Christ, ultimately. And then you hear people say, yeah, don't worry about the Old Testament. It's like, really? I'm going to worry about it. I think it's important. And I think God means for us to look at it and understand it. Yes?
Question, I'm jumping ahead.
Yeah.
But when Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah are in the fire, and there's the Son of Man, Daniel had an angel that came and shut the lion's mouth.
Right.
Why is God bringing the Son of Man, the Son of God, into the picture there?
Well,
instead of an angel.
right. So, without getting too deep into it, that they represent, you notice Daniel wasn't there with them.
Right.
Okay? They represent, symbolically, Israel that goes through the tribulation period, right? Daniel has not there because he is like a representation of the church in that sense, that he has been. So, it is the Lord that goes with them through the fire, right? But an angel then with Daniel would be, his angels are surrounding us, and that kind of thing. So, and I need to prep a little bit deeper than that, but that was my, that would be the best top line I could give you on that one right now.
They really don't explain where Daniel is with all this other nonsense.
And we'll look at that when we get to it, but that is the prevailing thought is that Daniel is a representation of the church in that story, because everything is talking about a multiplicity of things going on there. And where is Daniel? Well, Daniel's not there in that time of trial. Where is he? Well, he's taken out of the trouble, So, anybody else? All right. Remember that line, that old song, "To Dream the Impossible Dream"? This was Nebuchadnezzar's dream, was the impossible dream, because nobody could get the interpretation. So let's jump down here to this part where Daniel steps in. And it's interesting that his people, Nebuchadnezzar's people, said they basically admitted, we can't do what you're asking. We can't communicate with the people, with anyone to get your interpretation. So they're saying, we are unable, right? We can't do this. God was setting that up because God is going to allow this to come about so that he can prove himself, not only to Daniel and his friends, but to Nebuchadnezzar, because Nebuchadnezzar has a key piece in end times and world history. So he wants Nebuchadnezzar to learn a lesson he won't forget, which is why his people couldn't do this. So, verse 13, the decree went forth that the wise men should be slain, and they looked for Daniel and his friends to kill them. Daniel replied with discretion and discernment. I can't emphasize it enough. Discretion and discernment. This is an example for all of us. That there's times it's super important to have discourse, right? And Daniel wasn't like in anybody's face going, tell me what's going on. All right. So the captain of the king's bodyguard, who had gone forth to slay the wise Arioch, the captain of the king's bodyguard, who had gone forth to slay the wise men of Babylon, he said to Arioch, the king's commander, for what reason is the decree from the king so urgent? Then Arioch informed Daniel about the matter. So Daniel went in and requested of the king that he would give him time in order that he might declare the interpretation to the king. I bet it wasn't a lot of time. It doesn't say how much time, but I don't think the king probably gave him a whole lot of time. Maybe a night, maybe a day, something like that. So in that verse 17, Daniel went to his house and informed his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, about the matter so that they might request compassion from God, or the mercies of God. Some translations read, and I think I like that one better. They might request the mercies of God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that Daniel and his friends would not be destroyed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. So Dr. McGee said that this line, the mercies of God of heaven, is an expression that you find only in the books of captivity. All right? Including Ezra, Nehemiah, and Daniel. He said, after the departure of the glory of God from Jerusalem and the Holy of Holies in the temple, he is now addressed as the God of heaven. These Hebrew young men knew that God did not dwell in some little temple. He is the God of heaven. So they would desire mercy. That they would desire mercies reveals the basis of their prayer. God does not answer prayer because of the worth or the effort or the character or the works of the one who is praying. All prayer must rest upon his mercy. To pray today in Jesus' name simply means that we come to God not on our merit, but on His merit, looking to Him for mercy. There's a great Old Testament principle that if you eliminate the Old Testament, you eliminate that principle too. You know. So I just thought that was wonderful. And mercy is, if grace is the favor of God that we don't deserve, mercy is the relenting of the punishment we really do deserve. So, yes.
It's kind of, maybe I'm off here, but it reminds me of when the Assyrian army was around Jerusalem. What did Hezekiah do? But he took it to the temple and laid it out for God and sought God's face.
Yeah.
To me, it looks like it's almost the same thing.
Teaching us how to do it too, in that way, right?
We spread it before God.
Yeah. Which is why it's still good to have an altar, to lay it out before the Lord. You know, any place can be an altar. I get that, but it's like, do you have a place where you can lay it out? That's a really good point. Anybody else? So this last part, I want to spend some time with here, verses 19 through 23. So let me read this again. 19 through 23 says, Then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel said, Let the name of God be blessed forever and ever, for wisdom and power belong to Him. It is He who changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and establishes kings. He gives wisdom to wise men and knowledge to men of understanding. It is He who reveals the profound and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with Him. To you, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise, for you have given me wisdom and power. Even now you have made known to me what we requested of you, for you have made known to us the king's matter. So, years ago, Ray taught we were to prophecy, and we came on this verse, verse 21. It is He who changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and He establishes kings. So, in that, we'll get into the Daniel's interaction with Nebuchadnezzar next week. I want to focus on this for the rest of the time tonight, because that is a huge, huge truth, right? We get all wrapped up in political talk, you know. And in that, we forget that it is God who removes kings and God who establishes kings. And so with that, a couple of things that struck me, mainly in this moment where we are in the United States. So we've got an election coming up. We have candidates that are people have heavy opinions about. And there's not just two candidates, right? You've got a Green Party communist group, and I think there's a libertarian candidate as well. Okay, so you really have four that I know of nationwide candidates, of which you can go, how about that? On any of them, right? It is God who raises kings and a God who puts down kings. And in that, God has a plan. Now, it is also God who allows leaders to be chosen. And in our case, in the age of the Holy Spirit, as Romans 1 tells us, we have the passive wrath of God. So we talk about judgment, you know, coming to the United States or coming to any country that is in opposition to Him, that forgets Him, that kicks Him to the sidelines. And you go, well, what does passive wrath look like? And I think we're looking at, in the United States, what passive wrath looks like, in the fact that you can't walk the streets at night where you used to be able to, right? You drive down cities and you go, wow, this is really run down. What happened here? You know, you've got buildings that used to be really great factories that nobody's in there, haven't been in there for years, and they're run down. You know, what happened here? You know, I realize there's a life cycle of everything, but there's something different in this, you know. And it is God who is at work always. If it is God who is at work always, it was, I just want to get this right, it is He who changes the times and the seasons, the epochs. He removes kings and He establishes kings. It is God who is at work. So as we lay everything out in terms of where we're going for in just a few months here, I forget how many days it is to this election in November, but we need to understand how important it is for us to pray as a people to choose these leaders. Because in this, you can go, I'm not sure any of them are the right choice. Okay? Well, that may be a reason that God's going, I'm going to give you what you want. I'm going to give you over to those things that you say you really want.
Right.
And this is what your choice is because you don't want me included in the process. So here's your choices. Alan, you sir.
1 Timothy 2, verses 1 and 2. Pray for those in authority.
Yes.
If we don't, we are remiss.
Yeah.
We've let the ball drop.
Absolutely.
We don't include those folks.
Absolutely.
Most of those politicians I've shared with you and that I send emails to these people and they give you back a cookie cutter response.
Yeah.
Right.
And I hate that. I hate for somebody to play me for a fool or try to lie to me.
Yeah.
But God says, pray for those in authority.
Absolutely.
It's already written out and your name put on it.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I'm still told to pray for them.
That's right.
Yeah.
And what do you pray for them? When you pray for them, what do you pray?
God, give them wisdom according to your will.
Amen.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, I do a lot of my praying on my bicycle in the morning, and I'm telling you, I have a redheaded moment more often than not when I get to some of those ones.
A redheaded
The city of Monticello still allows a prayer to be given before they open their session each time 2 times a month. So I go in. I've been going in to pray, and that's exactly what I pray. That God gives them wisdom to make right decisions that benefit everybody. Essentially, is what I pray, and I think that is how we pray. You don't have to agree with their politics to pray for them.
Right.
And they can give all of us a redheaded moment, from time to time because of some of the things that are done and said and laws that are made. You go, I can't, and like in the state of Illinois, I just can't get over. I still can't get over that we've legalized marijuana. I think it's the dumbest thing we've ever done.
That was horrible.
One of the dumbest. There's a lot of dumbest. But
Yeah.
The governor wants us to be like a mecca for abortion.
yeah,
Oh, if you're denied, come here.
yeah,
And
yeah.
open arms. That
Babylon.
just makes me sick.
Exactly. Total disagreement with that. And all we can do is pray that God reveals to them the wrong that is and gets them to change their mind. That's all that we can do. But that's how we would pray for them,
And the doctors
And the doctors.
that are making millions.
Yeah, exactly. But it is He who reveals, or He who changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and establishes kings. And we have the right and the choice and the opportunity and the freedom to vote in here. But it is still God who is bringing this about. And just look at the last 2 presidential elections in the United States to go, who's really in charge? Because even the smartest people in the media didn't get it right either time, in the last 2, in their projections and all that. So it's not easy to sometimes to pray, to know what to pray, right? But I think that's right. I think we have to at least pray for wisdom, that there's somehow godly influence gets to these people, at every level, not just in Washington or not just Springfield, but at every level, that there's godly wisdom, there's people who bring godly perspective into the lives of these people, which is why it's great that you still write a letter. At least you can look at them and say, I tried to tell you, someday.
That prayer that Jack, somebody or another, said before Congress, when Congress opened, was excellent prayer.
Yeah.
Just excellent.
Yeah.
And they went after him like,
Yes.
it touched a nerve, and maybe it woke some people up.
Yeah.
Maybe it had an effect, that's for sure.
Well,
Maybe mostly negative, but it was an excellent prayer.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and why was it negative?
Well, why was it an effective negative?
Yeah,
It hit them
I
where
know.
they live.
That's I know the answer to that, but
Yeah.
I'm just saying, why was it negative?
Yeah.
Because he was talking right to them, and it hit
You
home.
bet.
Yeah.
What happens when you exorcise a demon from the body?
Yeah,
The demon's not happy about it.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
That's right.
Good point.
exactly.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Unlike the one before where it said a man and a woman.
Right.
Like, are you serious?
Yeah.
And he didn't get hardly any pushback for that. I'm like, you don't have any idea what amen means.
Right.
It has nothing to do with men and women.
And he prayed to
He prayed to a multitude of God.
yes, yeah. And Jonathan Kahn pointed that out in this book I'm listening to right now.
That was an absolute demonic prayer.
Yeah.
Because I listened to that one right after Jack's, and it was like, oh my, what a big difference.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll wrap this up. Verse 22, it is He, God, who reveals the profound and hidden things. Even though we don't always understand what's going on, it is God who reveals the profound and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells in Him. So, if we walk in the light as He is in the light, we have fellowship with one with another. Right? That's what it says in the New Testament. And so we can walk in the darkness because the light is with us and in us and through us. And that, think about this. Daniel was in darkness. His culture that he was living in was darkness. Well, ours is too. And how many times Jesus told us, you're the light of the world. The churches in Revelation, they were light, right? John talks about if we walk in the light as He is in the light. There's this thing of light that shines in darkness. And apparently it is just the remnant, basically, who shine and light in the darkness. You know, what's the old line? Not everything that glimmers is gold. But in our time, this is just like Daniel had to live. What I'm seeing, what I'm feeling as I'm reading this, and it is striking me that this is for us in our time, because this is how we're going to have to roll. This is how we're going to have to live. And we can complain about it, that it's not like it was in 1975. No, it's not. But we are here. Daniel could complain it's not like it was when I was 10 or 12. No, it's not. But it's not ever going to change. But here we are, as they say. Well, here we are. Well, here we are. And it is for us who take and follow and are sold out here to know it is God who reveals profound and hidden things. And He knows what is in the darkness. So if we're hitched to Him, if we're letting Him shine through us, we can see into that, know what we're into, but still make a huge difference in our time. And that's what I'm seeing coming at me out of Daniel right now. Any other thoughts on that from anybody? Any thoughts? I know that doesn't make you necessarily want to jump a chair, but I think it's like, this is just what I feel like the Lord is sharing with us.